with talking about Kuva footage here in the background, there are two things I basically want to wrap up on. I want to wrap up on talking about Kuva and talking about Riven mods. No shock there. But really what I want to talk about is the conversation around them and how it's being had and how that can be improved upon. I don't have too much of an opinion on Riven mods myself. I think they're a good system. I don't think it's a bad system at all. I think that there are some negative outcomes to it, and those negative outcomes are basically being talked about within an echo chamber, and, you know, people then hear a lot of the negativity, and, of course, you know, people don't come out and express positivity because you walk into a sandwich shop, you order a sandwich, you eat the sandwich, and it's a great sandwich. And that's kind of the expectation. It's not too often that you really express that, like, that was a great sandwich, thank you. You just kind of have it, and then you leave, and you go about your day. And I think that that's a lot of what is really happening here, but we'll get into that when the time comes. When it comes to farming Kuva, I actually think that this is... I don't think that there is as much negativity around it as there are Riven mods, and I think there's more positivity around it than we see. Warframe used to be a very grindy game, and now it's just pretty grindy, and I think that things are improving. As far as variety goes, and as far as a grind goes, I think that Kuva is nowhere near as bad as it seems, where it's like a month from now we're going to have like tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of Kuva for those of us who stick with things and, you know, continue the grind. And then, you know, new Riven mods will come out and we'll be like, oh, well, I have been sitting on this Kuva for a while now, and, you know, I look back and it's just like, that grind was nowhere near as bad as I thought, and I just have so much of it now, and a lot of it was even passively. I think about Nitane like that, where it was just like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to gather how much of this stuff, and now it's just like, oh, I float like 60 and 100 of it even at times, and it's just like, well, yeah, I just do it because I'm prepared for future stuff, and it's just a part of the game that I love to enjoy. And I think that Kuva is, again, another one of those things that's like that and will be improved upon, because I do think it needs improvements, and we'll get to that in just a second. But, yeah, it's just kind of one of those things where it's just like, well, yeah, that's part of the experience, but we're only a week out. In fact, we're not even a week out from when the War Within launched, and development takes time. I do call negatives out when they're there. You can look back at different states of the frame, like the one that comes to mind right now is the Sayandana that you get from Conclave, that you have to continue to play Conclave constantly to keep alight. And it's just kind of not really a Warframe kind of thing, because when it comes to aesthetics, that's not really what Warframe does. You have to continue to work on this aesthetic to maintain it. No, it's just you get it and it's there and you're happy with it. I don't know why I keep saying go time whenever I find a Kuva extractor, but I just love to say that, so whatever. You're going to see that a few times in this video. Anyway, so I think that when it comes to Kuva, again, it's not as negative as maybe some make it seem, but at the same time, there is definitely improvement needed, and thank you to those who are speaking concisely, critically, to help, and in an adult fashion, to help build the systems that are now in place because of the War Within. Kuva Guardians are now don't seem to need to be attacked by the Tenno to be marked anymore. I don't know if that's a bug or if I'm just playing with players who are really good at marking all the Kuva Guardians, but I haven't seemed to need to mark a single one within the past couple of days. I don't know how I feel about that. Basically, I kind of liked this need for the Tenno. Not that the Tenno aren't needed, but there was something there that was a bit too complex, but at the same time, it gave more of a purposefulness to our Tenno, and I would like to see that potentially return, but with improvement. we'll see. We'll see how this pans out as things continue to grow. Again, development takes time, and Warframe is not a developer that has a QA staff of like thousands of testers. In fact, oftentimes the PC crowd is their testing base a lot of times, because that's what you need when you develop something so big, that's so complex and has so many different complex algorithms and mathematical equations. You need thousands upon millions of instances of data to show you how things actually look and what needs improvement and where to actually make the fine-tuning. And so, yeah, with these two systems, I think that is what is happening, and it is, again, a thing that takes time. So, with Kuva Farming at Sedna, basically you just go to Sedna, and I think that is where one of the largest problems is at, and they're already talking about fixing this by moving the Sedna... by moving the fortress moves around the map, basically, and they're talking about where the fortress is at is where you might farm Kuva, as if there almost might be these Kuva alerts. I think that maybe landing a bit closer to, say, like, wherever the fortress is at, maybe the enemies get a buff in the area, and you get to choose just different missions to potentially farm these Kuva siphons. Would be better, as opposed to, like, you can only do so many alerts and then you have to wait. I'm not entirely sure. Basically, I think that the fortress moving is a good start. It's a good way to utilize that kind of almost mechanic that isn't there. And yeah, there really isn't much more to it than that. I just want to see what they do with that. I would love to see Kuva farming on Corpus planets, on infested planets. I want to see the fat ladies, the Kuva Guardians, fighting infested enemies, fighting Corpus enemies. I think that would be pretty cool, a pretty interesting dynamic. And I'm also curious to see how this might look in endless missions. I don't think that this should be absent from endless missions. I would love to go into an endless mission for 40 minutes and exit with a couple thousand worth of Kuva or more. We'll see. We'll see where that ends up. I think that what I really want to touch on now, and I do want to conclude by saying that I think that Kuva farming is more generous than a lot of the other farms that we have seen in this game and in other games, where walking away with, on average, what seems to be about 600 is pretty darn good, in my opinion. And that's just my opinion, and I want to express it because, again, I do think that there is more of an ease to expressing what is negative as opposed to what is positive. As of late, and that's understandable. However, we need to be able to do both. So yeah, I think that right now the numbers aren't too bad. Wouldn't mind any increase, but not saying there has to be one. When it comes to Riven mods, I think that this is where things might be a lot more split, and of course we're seeing a lot more negativity than people who are happy with the system. And what I want to say here really has a lot to do with... I missed one of the Kuvas there. I didn't realize that earlier when I was playing and recording this. What I want to say about this is that I think that there are a lot of people who have good points to express on the forums, on Twitter, on Reddit. However, I think that a lot of their points are buried by rushing to these outlets and expressing these things without absorbing them more, taking a breath. I say this because basically when you express your point and all of it is negative, or it's just very harsh, How can you be so stupid? You know, a bunch of cursing. You know, like, have you never worked in design before? You know, like, things like this that I have actually seen. And it's just like, wow, how long have you played Warframe for? And that's the problem. That's the problem. Because there probably is something worth expressing there. However, it's not going to be heard. The reason it's not going to be heard is because the developers are adults. They work with fellow adults. And that is the problem. That is not an adult way to express things. You need to... not only, if you want to just express the negative aspects, you have to present them in a critique. It can't just be like, this is bad, and that's it. Like, you have to express, like, why it's bad, and if there is nothing positive about it, where the lack of positivity is, and how it negatively impacts the game, how there can be a net benefit from changing these things. I studied philosophy for 6 years in college, and that I think is a lot of the problem of just kind of these internet arguments in general. Hell, I've learned that just from being in pain for the last 4 years of my life, in both of my fucking legs, is that when all it is anger, nothing else is heard. And I think a lot of these points deserve to be heard. And when it's extreme, or when it's when it's extreme and just makes these huge, like, oh, it's just terrible and there's nothing good about it, like, what's there to be heard from that? Nothing. Because obviously it's not breaking the game. And this footage is going to play on loop because I'm trying to conclude, but obviously there's a lot to unpack here. Obviously it's not entirely that bad. Otherwise, there wouldn't be people saying, well, actually, I got this good mod that isn't for one of these great guns. Take Mogamu's video on Riven mods, for example, where he talks about the Grinlock, or I believe he also talked about the Miter, or that may have been someone else who was talking about using the Miter. And whenever there is an example that is counter to an extreme point, that basically means that either one of those 2 points are wrong, or there needs to be less polarity, where basically, oh, wait, there's middle ground where we can actually talk about both sides of this. And that is where Riven mods lie, and that is why even Steve was talking about today how, like, the person who was insulting him on Twitter, their point doesn't matter. And I'm sure he's sorry to say that, and I'm sorry to say that, or maybe he's not, I don't know, but that point is lost because they failed to take a breath and actually absorb and think about more than just their own personal 5-minute or 10-minute experience with the new subsystem. And I also think that that's important, that this system already lies on top of a system that has worked for years now, mods. And so that's already a huge benefit to the Riven mod system, because when Focus came out, now we basically just use it for 2 or maybe 3 or 4 passives, and that's kind of it. It's not really a purposeful system, and it sounds like, and the way Scott put it today, developer Scott, not me, it sounds like they're just going to take a sledgehammer to it, and that sounds like it's necessary. However, the mod system does not require a sledgehammer. The mod system works, which means there is already a positive element there. And when all of it is just the Riven mod system should just be thrown out, that's just, obviously that can't be true, because that would mean that the mod system has to be thrown out. Also, this rhetoric that has kind of started to plague our game for the last, I want to say year and a half, where it's shit, it's garbage, just throw it away, it's not worth having. Obviously, I'm going to say it as a person who's making variety shows. Obviously, a lot of that shit's not true. Obviously, a lot of that is a polarizing statement that is easy for people who don't agree with it to not listen to. And that means that your point is lost. Because you're just jumping to one extreme end of the spectrum. Where in a game where we typically fight in alerts, in dark sectors, in relic missions, we typically fight enemies that are rated at a medium difficulty, 25 to 45 in level, give or take 5 levels. You can use a plethora of weapons against them to be effective with. You don't have to use the uber builds, the uber weapons. You don't always have to have the Similar. You don't always have to have the Ignis. You don't always have to have the Tigris. You don't always have to have the Dread. There are plenty of weapons to work with, and obviously when we continue to fight a lot of those enemies, obviously mods that come for those weapons that you can use against those enemies, there is something there that works. And you don't even have to bring up those points. You don't have to, like what I said on what was it? Oh, it was a tweet to I forget who it was. I tweet at someone that there doesn't need to be more positivity necessarily. Heck, there doesn't even need to be realism in everyone, but there needs to be realism everywhere. So basically, if you want to be negative, or you want to present the negative aspects of the Riven system, you need to be realistic about those aspects. If I want to be positive about the positive aspects of the Riven system, I need to be realistic about that, and realistic that there are negatives to it. And again, I bring this up because I think that there are many great points on both sides of this system, this subsystem, and they both deserve to be heard. But a lot of them aren't going to be heard because they're presented in such a, well, I hate to tell you this, an immature manner. Realism isn't a hard thing to obtain. I tell you this because as someone who every fucking day for 4 years has lived in pain, it's very easy to just to just react within the moment, to just be reactionary, to let the anger, to let the pain absorb me. But the difficult thing is to be realistic. However, that difficult thing has made things better for me. It has made my family more understanding. It has made my girlfriend more understanding. It has made my friends more understanding of my situation. I can talk about this with Mark on Great Scout Marcus, how he has become more understanding towards my situation and I more understanding towards his situation, because I get angry and then I stop and I take a breath and I walk away and I think about it, sometimes for 5 minutes, sometimes for an hour, sometimes a day. And I come back to it and I can tell that person, look, I was angry about this, but this is why, for these reasons, and you are a person who cares about my opinion because you're in my family, or you're a friend of mine, or I play your game, and the community is a big part of your game. And so I am here to present why I felt so negatively. And I also, since I took a breath, recognize that there are these positive things about it, and that there are these potential improvements that I would like to say to you. Or maybe I don't have any improvements, but I will continue to stew on them, and as I continue to play the game, hopefully I come across some of these more positive aspects that I am seeing other people talk about, and maybe I will have a shared opinion on that, or that might affect what I have to say on improving the system if I still see it in such a negative light. Talking to each other like adults, taking the time to take a breath, forms more friendships, forms a better game, forms a better community, and I think Warframe deserves that, and I think a lot of you out there who play this game and want to talk about this game deserve that too. Let's go ahead and get into the topic for this week and talk about Valkyr Prime. See you guys in the next half of this State of the Frame.